Number 10. Plymouth Duster. The Plymouth Duster in 1973 was the compact fastback that Chrysler had been selling on the Valiant platform since 1970. The 225 cubic inch slant 6 inclined 30 degrees from vertical, the affordable price, the fastback body that communicated youth without requiring the insurance premium that the muscle car's performance specification had produced. By 1973, the Duster was in its fourth year and had accumulated the ownership record that compacts accumulate when their mechanical simplicity produces the same result in every service department. The mechanic, who had seen 3 of them, described the experience to the buyer standing at the counter deciding between the Duster and the Vega. That conversation, repeated across every American city, was what the Duster's sales figure documented. Its 225 slant 6 gave the compact buyer the reliability case that Chrysler had been building since 1960. Its Duster 340 package gave the buyer who wanted the performance argument a small block V8 at a compact price. The Duster is at number 10 because in 1973, the compact Plymouth that opened this list did so as the car most Americans could have described from memory. The fastback that was in every apartment parking lot, every community college lot, every driveway of every young American who needed transportation and had decided the Slant 6 reputation was worth more than the Vega's Motor Trend Award. Number 9. Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo arrived with one of the most significant redesigns in its short history, the move to the Colonnade A-body platform that gave it the massive C-pillars, the longer wheelbase, and the personal luxury proportions that the Monte Carlo would carry through its peak commercial years. Its previous configuration, introduced in 1970, had established the personal luxury Chevrolet market position. The 1973 redesign gave that position its definitive visual identity: the wide C-pillar, the formal roofline, the long hood that communicated the personal luxury aspiration at a Chevrolet price. The Monte Carlo's 1973 Colonnade debut coincided with the oil embargo, which arrived in October and made the car's 350 cubic inch V8 a calculation rather than a given for buyers who had not yet made their purchase decisions. Its velour interior options, its bucket seat and center console configuration, and the Chevrolet dealer network that placed it within reach of every American buyer gave the Monte Carlo the personal luxury market at the price point between the Chevelle and the full-size Impala. The Monte Carlo is at number 9 because in 1973, the personal luxury Chevrolet received the redesign that would define it through its peak commercial years, and because the buyers who chose it in October 1973 were simultaneously reading newspaper coverage of the oil embargo and deciding that the velour interior was still worth the conversation at the pump. Number 8. Pontiac Grand Prix. In 1973, the Pontiac Grand Prix underwent the same Colonnade redesign that transformed the Monte Carlo, a shared A-body platform that gave both personal luxury coupes their formal rooflines, their opera windows, and the proportions that defined the segment's visual language through the mid-decade. At the Pontiac price, one step above Chevrolet in the GM hierarchy, the Grand Prix buyer was making a deliberate declaration about the specific rung of the American economic ladder they had chosen to represent from the driveway. Its 400 cubic inch V8 and its floor-shifted turbo-hydromatic gave the personal luxury buyer who had moved up from the Monte Carlo the performance credential that the step-up price implied. Pontiac sold the Grand Prix in numbers that placed it among the most purchased personal luxury coupes in America. Its waterfall grille, its long hood, and the bucket seat interior with the console gave the Grand Prix buyer the visual argument at a Pontiac price from the dealer positioned between the Chevrolet and Buick showrooms in every GM cluster. The Grand Prix is at number 8 because in 1973, both the Monte Carlo and the Grand Prix received the Colonnade redesign that would carry both nameplates to their peak commercial years, and because the buyer who chose the Grand Prix over the Monte Carlo that year was paying the price difference to make a specific statement about the distinction between the two divisions. Number 7. Oldsmobile Cutlass.
The Oldsmobile Cutlass in 1973 was 2 years away from becoming the best-selling passenger car in the United States, but in 1973, the trajectory was already visible in the quarterly sales data that General Motors was reading and that the Chevrolet, Buick, and Pontiac divisions were observing with the specific attention that a divisional rival's commercial momentum produces. The Cutlass Supreme's colonnade body, its 350 or 455 cubic inch V8, and its position in the GM hierarchy between the Monte Carlo's Chevrolet Price and the Buick Riviera's Premium gave the mid-size personal luxury buyer the Oldsmobile interpretation of the category. The same personal luxury with an Oldsmobile badge that communicated one step further up the hierarchy than a Chevrolet badge communicated. In 1973, the Cutlass was not yet the car that would define American automotive commercial dominance for the rest of the decade. It was building toward that position through the mechanism that commercial dominance is always built, one buyer at a time, making the decision that the sales data eventually confirmed. The Cutlass is at number 7 because in 1973, the car that would be the best-selling passenger car in America in 1975 and 1976 and 1977 was already in every American suburb, every American commercial strip, and every American garage where the buyer had decided that the Oldsmobile price was the correct price for where they had arrived.
Number 6. Volkswagen Beetle. The Volkswagen Beetle in 1973 had surpassed the Ford Model T's all-time production record the previous year, 15,007,033 cumulative units, a record that had stood for 45 years, and that the Beetle had broken with the same air-cooled flat-4 engine, the same torsion bar suspension, and the same heater that the American automotive press had been describing as optimistic about its relationship with actual warmth since the car first arrived in American showrooms. Its 60 horsepower in 1973 American configuration, its absence of a water cooling system, and its mechanical simplicity that any competent shop anywhere in the country could service gave the Beetle buyer the ownership argument that had been accumulating since 1949 in service records across every American city. In 1973, the Beetle was the car the Arab oil embargo would benefit most dramatically, not because the embargo created its appeal, but because it confirmed publicly what Beetle owners had been saying privately for 24 years, that fuel economy mattered, and that the automotive press's annual descriptions of the car's limitations had been missing the point. The Beetle is at number 6 because in 1973, the car that had broken the most significant production record in automotive history the previous year was still accumulating American sales on the same argument it had been making since the Eisenhower administration. Number 5. Chevrolet Impala. The Chevrolet Impala in 1973 was the best-selling passenger car in the United States, not by the million-unit margins that had defined its commercial dominance in 1965 and 1966, but by the margin that a full-size American sedan commands when it is the most practical, most accessible, most mechanically familiar choice available from the most widespread dealer network in the country. In January 1973, the Impala buyer was making the same decision that Impala buyers had been making since 1958, full-size, V8, Chevrolet dealer, family transportation. In October 1973, that buyer was standing in a gasoline line and performing a calculation that the January version of themselves had not anticipated performing before the model year ended. Its 350 or 454 cubic inch V8 options, its 6-passenger interior, and the Chevrolet dealer in every American county gave the Impala buyer the full-size American car at the full-size American price in the last year that the full-size American car would be purchased in those volumes without the fuel cost calculation becoming the primary variable rather than a secondary one. The Impala is at number 5 because in 1973, the most purchased passenger car in America was still the full-size Chevrolet, and because the buyer who chose it in September 1973 was making a decision that the October oil embargo would immediately contextualize in a way that September had not prepared them for. Number 4. Dodge Dart.
The Dodge Dart in 1973 was 10 years into the compact repositioning that had nearly doubled Dodge's annual sales in the car's first year, and that had accumulated in the decades since the owner testimony that made the Slant Six's reliability the most frequently cited compact recommendation in American service departments. Its 225 cubic inch Slant Six inclined 30 degrees from vertical since 1960 so that its oil distribution geometry could serve the bearing surfaces through ownership cycles measured in decades, had by 1973 produced a service record that independent mechanics across every American market described in the same terms: that it was the correct compact domestic engine if the buyer's primary criterion was the number of miles between problems rather than the number of cubic inches between cylinder walls. The Arab oil embargo that arrived in October 1973 made the Dart's fuel economy argument urgent in a way it had not been commercially urgent since the spring selling season. The compact that had outsold most domestic rivals on service record alone found in October that the service record and the fuel economy record were the same argument presented twice. The Dart is at number 4 because in 1973, the compact Dodge with the 10-year Slant Six record was the car the oil embargo confirmed had been correct for buyers who had chosen it on reliability grounds and discovered in October they had simultaneously chosen it on fuel economy grounds.
Number 3. Chevrolet Chevelle. The Chevrolet Chevelle arrived for 1973 in its Colonnade redesign. The new A-body platform with the formal roofline, the rectangular body lines, and the fixed rear side windows that replaced the classic fastback and hardtop bodies the Chevelle had carried since 1964. The 1973 redesign was the most significant change the Chevelle had undergone in its 9-year history, and it redirected the car from the muscle car and mid-size performance segment that had produced the LS6 454 and the Super Sport toward the personal luxury positioning that the Monte Carlo had been occupying since 1970. Its 350 or 454 cubic inch V8 options remained, but the Colonnade body communicated something different from the classic A-body that the mid-size Chevelle's buyer had moved from performance aspiration toward personal luxury comfort. The Malibu trim gave the Chevelle buyer the classic Chevrolet midsize in a new body that communicated the decade's shifting priorities more accurately than any automotive press announcement could have. The Chevelle is at number 3 because in 1973, the car whose classic A-body had carried the LS6 454 arrived in a completely new form, and because the redesign that changed its proportions, roofline, and market positioning was the most visible single model year transition in the American midsize market, in the year the oil embargo confirmed the transition had arrived at exactly the right time.
Number 2. Chrysler New Yorker. The Chrysler New Yorker in 1973 was the full-size American luxury car that communicated its driver's position with the specific authority that the Chrysler nameplate carried in 1973, above the Dodge and Plymouth full-size cars in the Chrysler Corporation hierarchy, below the Imperial that Chrysler had been positioning against the Cadillac DeVille and the Lincoln Continental at the top of the American luxury market. Its 440 cubic inch V8 and its standard equipment list that included every power accessory the American luxury buyer expected gave the New Yorker buyer the full-size American luxury experience at a price that the Cadillac buyer recognized as the tier below their own decision. The New Yorker's formal roofline, its available leather interior, and the Chrysler dealer network gave the American luxury buyer who had decided on Chrysler the most complete expression of what the Chrysler luxury argument was. The New Yorker is at number 2 because in 1973, the full-size Chrysler luxury car was selling to the American buyer who had arrived at the income level the New Yorker communicated in the last year that the 440 cubic inch V8 would power that communication without the fuel cost calculation that October 1973 would permanently install in every subsequent full-size American luxury car purchase decision. The buyer who chose it in September 1973 was the last generation to make that decision in the uncalculated way that the New Yorker's buyers had always made it. Number 1. Ford Gran Torino. The Ford Gran Torino in 1973 was a mid-size Ford selling in the hundreds of thousands, a conventional front-engine rear-wheel drive car with a 351 or 429 cubic inch V8, available as a coupe, fastback, or station wagon, positioned between the Maverick's compact practicality and the LTD's full-size ambition. It was the car that every American driving past the Ford dealer in 1973 recognized, and that no American driving past that dealer would have identified as the future object of a specific form of cultural longing. In September 1975, 2 years after 1973, ABC would premiere a police drama called Starsky and Hutch. The lead detectives would drive a red 1975 Ford Gran Torino with a white vector stripe. The car would become, over 4 seasons of national television, the most visually recognized American police car in the country's history. In 1973, none of that had happened. The Gran Torino was simply the mid-size Ford, practical, conventional, selling in numbers that the Ford sales division found satisfying and that no cultural analyst had identified as the foundation of a future icon. The Gran Torino is at number 1 because 1973 is the year before the car that nobody was watching became the car that everybody recognized, and because the buyers who drove one home from the Ford dealer in 1973 did so without knowing they were acquiring the pre-fame version of one of the most culturally resonant American cars of the following decade.